Thank you very much, Jeffrey. So I have a question to ask. Why is Japantown important? Now, what I like to do is share 3 points with you and explain why. I say first is the history. It's the history of the Japanese Americans, what happened during World War II. And it's one of these things, right? If you're not careful, history has a way of repeating itself. The second is really the culture and that diversity. I believe it's important to embrace our diversity, our differences. If you think about it, the US is really made up of all these different backgrounds. And I encourage everyone to embrace that diversity. And the third is really the future. How do we maintain our Japantown? I like to think of it as succession planning. So with that, let me start with a little bit of background and the history. Some of you may or may not be aware, but I'm going to share this with you just to kind of give you a baseline. So the history starts back in 1868. This is called the Meiji Restoration. Commander Perry from the US goes over to Japan and wants to open up the trade channel. What he does is he first goes to the samurais who were in rulership at that time, says, hey, would you guys like to open up the trade channel? And they're like, no. And so he goes over to the imperial family, has the same conversation, twists their arm a little bit, and they say, okay. And so from there, what happens is Commander Perry starts bringing over technology. And at that time, it's the machine gun. So you fast forward, first major battle, the samurais are coming over the hill on their horses, swords drawn, and the imperial families are waiting, bum. And all of a sudden, the rulership changes from the samurai era to the imperial family. And that's when the capital moves from Kyoto, where the original capital was, to Tokyo, where it resides today. And this is the start of the Meiji Restoration. When this happens, most Asian cultures, number one, son inherits everything else. Number two, number three, not so lucky. So they're out trying to figure out what are they going to do next. At the same time, the US had just passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so now they were short on labor. The two countries got together, US, Japan, they agreed, and they allowed immigration to start. And so this is when folks started coming over. But even before that, this is before Hawaii was even a part of the US territory. Japanese were already coming into Hawaii, providing labor, providing support. And as the US opened up, they took that and went to Seattle, San Francisco, and then eventually LA. And that continued on until all of a sudden, folks on the mainland were saying, gosh, there's too many black-haired, brown-eyed people coming in. We need to slow this down. So in 1907, they passed what they call the Gentleman's Agreement. This is where they stopped issuing passports to any laborers, but spouses were welcome, children were welcome of these family members that are already in the US. The problem was most of these folks coming over, typically men, were single, and they didn't have a family yet. And so what do? This is when the picture bride era started. So you had friends introducing them to someone. They say, hey, check this person out. What do you think? And then this is way before the internet. So what do? They take a picture and they send it back and forth, letters, postcards. And after a while, they decide, okay, we're going to get married. Sight unseen. And so they sign a proxy, and then the spouse gets to come over on a ship. And then they're looking for each other with a picture in hand at a pier. And that's the start of all of these families being developed here in the US. And then again in 1924, the Asian Exclusion Act kicked in, and this prevented any further immigration whatsoever. So what happens? They go to South America. So if you've ever been to Peru or Brazil, you'll see that they have an extremely large population of Japanese Peruvians. And this is because of this law that forced folks not to come in North America after 24, but go to South America. And keep in mind, Japan lost the war. And so all these soldiers are coming back. They couldn't provide food, support. And so the government sponsored even more people to go to South America. The interesting thing was you had to pass a test. And if you were worthy of the trip, then they sponsored you and they sent you on your way. If you ever have a chance to go to Kobe, there's a museum there on a hill that's shaped like a ship. And the reason for that was because they wanted people to endure that trip and be comfortable with it. And so before you made that trip, you would go to that place, get trained, get comfortable with the environment. It had low ceilings, pipes running through it, and literally shaped like a ship so that you could get acclimated before you actually made the journey. Now, Canada was also part of the immigration story. So there were folks that went up. Roughly 22,000 folks were up in Canada as well. And so when things happened, of course, on the mainland, Canada was also affected. Now, at one time, we had more than 40 plus Japantowns here in California alone. Now we're down to 3. And I have to say, I'm a little partial, but between San Francisco, San Jose, and LA, my favorite, of course, is San Jose. And the reason why I say this is because, not because I live here now, but because of the history. It's got a 135-year history. It hasn't changed. It hasn't moved a lot in that time frame. And I have to attribute it to the legacy that's left in our community. There are many shops that are 3, now coming on to 4 generations of ownership. It hasn't changed hands. And I think that's one of the beauties of the community. The other part is it's an extremely collaborative community. As Jeffrey mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of time at the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. I'm on their board, was a past president. And when we have an event, everybody in the community will support us. And likewise, when somebody else is having an event, we support them. And it's just extremely collaborative environment, which makes it extremely friendly. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful environment. The other point that I always make is, why did the San Jose Japantown get established where it is? Well, if you look at this map, what you'll see here is a place called Highlandville. It was named after the proprietor, the person who owned this land, who loaned it and leased it to the Chinese. And so this became Chinatown in our community. And the Japanese found that it was much easier to coexist with other Asians at that time because there was a lot of racial prejudice going on. And so you couldn't just rent a place or buy a house or get housing anywhere in the city. But if you were close to other Asians, and at that time, the Chinese, it was much easier to coexist. The second reason was farmers. The farmers would come in, pick up the Chinese, take them out to their farms, work an honest day, and drop them off. So the Japanese farmers would do the same thing and jump on those trucks and go out and work an honest day and come back. And so Japantown blossomed during the peak of the picking season, where you'd have 3,000 to 4,000 farmers coming in of JA and Japanese backgrounds. And that is how our Japantown got established. Over time, Chinatown economically lost out and it slowly faded away, but our Japantown continues to thrive to this day. Now, this is the center of Japantown. There's a coffee shop there in the corner. It's called Roy's Station. 3 generations of ownership. The grandkids now run it. It used to be a gas station, but now it's turned into a go-to for coffee. So if you're looking for a great cup of coffee, that's the place to go. The museum is right down that street, so 5th, headed towards City Hall. So if you're ever in Japantown, I definitely encourage you to drop by the museum. And I'm going to talk about it today, but seeing it is on a totally different level. And if you can, try to get a docent to walk you through it. It'll be a much, much better experience. Now, back in the day, before the HPs and the Apples and the Googles and the NVIDIAs, this land that we're in here in Santa Clara Valley was all farmland. And the Japanese did it in a big way. Big way as in they were only 2% of the population on the West Coast. But at the peak, they were more than 60% of the farming. Imagine that. A group of people coming in from another country, settling in, working really hard, and then all of a sudden taking over the market. What I would argue is that success that happened created this animosity. 2% of the population on the West Coast were Japanese and Japanese Americans, but they owned 60% of the produce market. That tension between the original farming unions was incredible. And so what happens is all of a sudden these farming unions are going to the government and complaining about the market share and how it's been flip-flopped because of the Japanese and Japanese Americans. Now, by the 1940s, you had 150,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans on the Hawaiian Islands, roughly another 115,000, 112,000 on the West Coast, and another 10,000 inland. And so all of this tension is building with the farming unions until December of 41, when the Imperial Navy attacks Pearl Harbor. That is when the farming unions go back to the government and make a blanket statement look how bad these Japanese people are. You need to do something. And that is where Executive Order 9066 comes in. I would argue that that was extremely politically and economically driven because of the success the Japanese had in farming on the West Coast. So look at these facts. The incarceration only affected the West Coast. You had 150,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans in Hawaii. And they had these special camps called Department of Justice or DOJ camps, where they captured the leaders. So if you're a teacher, preacher, government official, the FBI had you on a list. The day after Pearl Harbor, they went and grabbed you, put you into these DOJ camps. And Hawaii was not excluded from that. So of the 150,000, they gathered about 1,800, so less than 2%. On the mainland, of course, all the leaders that were on the West Coast were gathered and put into the Department of Justice camps. And I would argue that that was because of the success that they had on the West Coast in farming. Because think about it, Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii. Yet of the 150,000, you only had less than 2% incarcerated. Why? Well, the person who was responsible for the War Relocation Authority knew the Japanese and stood up for them and defended them and said, leave them alone. I will take responsibility for them. And so they did. The other fact of the matter was they were a third of the population. And so if they had incarcerated all those Japanese and Japanese Americans in the Hawaiian Islands, it would have shut the islands down. And they knew that. So for those two reasons, they did leave them alone. On the West Coast now, the War Relocation Authority was run by DeWitt, who really had the farming unions screaming at him. And so he followed their recommendations and took that opportunity to incarcerate all the folks on the West Coast. Now, I argue that this was, again, economically and politically driven. And the reason why I say that is logic would say, why not Hawaii? Another fact, if you had family inland, let's use Colorado as an example, and you were able to find a way to get to Colorado, you had housing, a job, and a place to stay. You could be living in Colorado while you had folks that looked just like you that were living in Amachi, the camp there. And you have to ask yourself, why? What's the difference? Well, the difference is how and when you arrive. Another fact, if you were a college student and you had a sponsor and you could go to college on the East Coast, you never went to camp. Bottom line, they just wanted them out of the West Coast so they could grab the land. So when you look at the numbers, roughly 50% of the Japanese and Japanese Americans lost everything. Yeah. This diagram shows you kind of an overview of all the different 10 camps. And so that's what you're seeing here in the little red triangles. The other thing that kind of just adds more salt to the wound was the government told everybody to work the fields until it became harvest time. Now, the camps took 6 months to build, but in the interim, what did they do? They told the Japanese to continue to work the fields, and then just as picking season came, they evacuated them and they put them into temporary assembly centers. These housing units were not fit for human consumption, but they needed a place to put a lot of folks. And so at that time, it happened to be state fairgrounds and horse race tracks. Can you imagine sleeping in a stall? The stench, the smell would have just been overwhelming. But that's what they had to do. So folks that are in the Bay Area, you recognize Tan Fran Park. It's a mall today, but back in the 40s, it was a racetrack. And that's exactly where the folks from San Francisco went first. Tan Fran Park, and then off to Topaz in their case. So just to think about that is it just again adds more salt to the wound, because they had to work the fields until picking season, and then they were told to vacate, only to let the next person come in and profit from everything that you had done to get to that point. So we talk about these camps, and a lot of people don't know what camp we're talking about, but this is an illustration of what that is. It's a government-built incarceration, and it's forced. They were literally forced to go to these locations, and the government built these. And so if you look at this construction, it's kind of hard to tell from this distance, but one layer of wood with black tar paper on top, no insulation whatsoever. All of our homes today have layers of insulation. Gypsum board on the inside, interior walls, insulation followed by an exterior wall that protects us. And typically double pane windows. In the camps, they had one layer of black tar paper, wood, that's it. Single pane windows. And some of these camps were located in Arizona, which is extremely hot in the summertime. And so you can imagine how unbearable the heat must have been. But that is really the story. And then, of course, folks had to eat, so they did have breakfast, lunch, and dinner served in the mess halls. And then, of course, most of these folks were farmers, and so they had their farms. And so they, after a while, would definitely become more self-sufficient, providing their own vegetables and then livestock as well. In camp life, depending on who you ask, well, you'll get a different answer for sure. We talk to a lot of young people who are now, of course, much older. But if you talk to some of those people, especially the farm kids, they'll tell you that camp was not that bad because they were now not responsible for working the fields. Imagine that, right? You come from a family that runs a farm. You have no weekends, right? You wake up, you work the fields, you go to school, you come home, you work the fields, you eat dinner, you do your homework, go to bed, wake up, work the fields, and it repeats every day with no holidays. You go to camp, there's no more field. There's no more farm. Now, the parents, of course, were devastated because they had built this from nothing. But the kids, of course, didn't look at it that way. Well, they probably realized it because their parents were suffering. But from a child's perspective, camp was not so bad. And they did have sports. You can see from this picture here. This is the Manzanar field. And so the Jays and the Japanese, of course, love baseball. And so they had that as a recreation. They also had a basketball team in Manzanar, and of course, women's and men's. And this picture is, I've made many trips to Manzanar, and one of the trips I made out there was with the youth at Wesley. And so the Rangers told us, if you clear this field, we'll let you play baseball on it. And that was such a surreal experience. I'll remember standing out in the outfield thinking to myself, wow, 80 years ago, they were doing the same thing. And that was just such a eerie feeling, but it was also just surreal. And now, if you ever have a chance to go to Manzanar, what they've done is they've uncovered a lot of these beautiful rock gardens. And if they have a picture and they are able to reconstruct the same exact rock garden, they are doing exactly that. And during the pilgrimages that they have, they will actually fill it up with water so you can get a sense for what that was like. And the beautiful thing about this, and it's amazing, is Manzanar was where most of the LA folks went, and there were a lot of gardeners that came in from LA. And so what they did was they made these rock gardens and they positioned them such that you would have the camp to your backs and the garden in the front. So for that moment in time, you could take yourself away from camp and you could have this normal experience. Just amazing to think about. And this is an example of one of those rock gardens that they actually have recreated based on the pictures that they have found. And so they're, again, rebuilding them as they can. Now, the other just amazing story that I always love to share is about the courage that a lot of these young men and women had to serve in the US military against everything, meaning their families were incarcerated, yet they wanted to prove to the US that they were just as loyal as the next person. Now, there were 3 infantries, the 100th coming from Hawaii, the 442nd, mainly made up of the mainlanders, and then the Military Intelligence Service, or the MIS. MIS provided language translation. They were American-born, but raised speaking Japanese. And so that was an incredible tool that the US military had, because there was a lot of communiques going back and forth, back and forth. And because they spoke Japanese, once they got their hands on the translations or on the communiques, they can translate those and bring them up to headquarters and provide a lot of information to them before it even actually happened. Now, these men and women, I mean, it was just amazing in terms of what they were able to provide. But there are so many amazing stories. And the one I always like to share with everybody is the one about the Lost Battalion. There was a troop or a battalion that was moving from France through Germany at a very fast clip. and 270 men were separated from the main infantry. Battalion after battalion tried to go in there and save these 270 men, but they were surrounded by the Germans in a pretty tight forest, and so they weren't successful. And so as a last resort, they sent the 100th and the 442nd in there. Over 5 days of battle, at the cost of 700 injuries and casualties, they finally prevailed to save 211. But do the math. You spend 700 injuries and casualties to save 211? But that is the kind of guts, the courage, and the spirit that the JAs brought to the US military. And that is what we should all be proud of, because they fought for not only our country, but for us to be able to stand here and be proud to be an American, even under all this duress. And to me, that's just an incredible show of loyalty. They were the most highly decorated infantry for their size, and they continue to be. 18,000 medals, amazing. And of those, 9,500 Purple Hearts. And that's just, to me, again, amazing. We get a lot of school groups coming through the museum, and I always like to share this symbol with them, and that is bamboo. You know, the Japanese are extremely resilient. If you look at all the history and all the things that have gone on in Japan, of course, we had Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then we had the Kobe Hanshin earthquake, and then, of course, the Tohoku triple threat. All those things have happened, but look at Japan today, and they're bouncing back again. Same thing for us here in the mainland, right? Incarceration, 9066. And we have our challenges as well, but I always tell the students, think of yourself as bamboo. No matter what storm hits, no matter what hardships you have, bounce back. You have to bounce back. So why is this history important? Again, people need to know this story, and you can't forget it, because if you do, it will repeat itself. And so that's the reason why I think this is so important. Now, for those of you who are from San Jose or in the Bay Area, I welcome you to come visit the museum. Our mission is real simple, CPS. That's to collect, preserve, and share the Japanese American history, culture, and arts of the Greater Bay Area, and to also build bridges of human understanding through inspiration, innovation, and inclusion. We have a beautiful 6,400 square foot main building with artifacts that go back in time to share what it was like. And we have a one-of-a-kind barracks that you can actually walk into. It's modeled exactly after the Tula Lake camps. And then we have a big agricultural exhibit that's another 2,400 square feet in the back, so that you can get a sense for what it was like back in the time frame. And all of this is made possible because of our members, donors, and volunteers that really make up the San Jose Community Hub, which is really that Japanese spirit, that kokoro, the heart and soul of who we are. So one of the other things, the history is definitely important, but the culture and the sensitivity, the things that we were brought up to be aware of as Japanese Americans, right? I remember my mom always telling me, be aware of your surroundings, meaning don't cause other people harm. Don't disrupt other people, right? And we always used to say in Japanese, kiotsuka, which means just be aware of your surroundings so that you don't affect other people. And we still try to keep up with these traditions. And I try to pass those down to Jeffrey and my other son, Marcus, and hope that they will continue to follow through on a lot of those traditions. And the other aspect of the museum is we love to have these cultural events like the Hinamatsuri and the Boys' Day. And this helps us remember all of these different cultures. And then the question always becomes, well, how do we continue to sustain this? And so we have a program that we actually share with the 3 Japantowns. So JCYC up in San Francisco, JCCSJ, the community center, or the Japantown Community Congress of San Jose, and then Kizuna down in LA. The 3 groups work together to bring in college students every year. And we just went through the interview process. We've got them selected. They'll be coming to LA for the first week of orientation. And at the end of the program, they'll be coming to San Jose for the closing, and then finally to San Francisco for the closing ceremonies. But this is how we're trying to plant the seeds for the future, is really through our youth. And the whole objective for this program is that we hope by having them go through this program and they meet the leaders of the different Japantowns and they meet each other and build these lasting relationships, is that they'll come back as either volunteers, board members, or even executive directors for our nonprofit organizations. And so we're trying to plant the seeds for our future today through our youth. So this is how we hope to sustain and maintain our Japantowns for the future. If you've never been to the museum, zap this QR code. It's a virtual tour. We had a company come in called Matterport through Virtual Eyes Media, and it's a 360-degree scan of the entire museum. So you can take a virtual tour. So if you're out of state and not able to come, this is a great way to experience the museum. If you're local, look me up. I'll be more than happy to give you a tour. And if you do visit, please look me up. One more plug, if I may. We do a fundraiser every year, and this is the one. It's our sake fundraiser, and it's going to be on August 10th. It's at the museum, and we'll have 5 or 6 different sake vendors and a local brewery come in, and we have small bites from our local restaurants. It's a great fundraiser, and it's a lot of fun. So if you're in town or if you're available, we'd love to have you. You can zap the QR code. The tickets are now on sale on our website. And if you forget the URL, you can always go to the JAMS website, jamsj.org. And with that, I will pause and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Michael. Does
you bet.
anyone have any questions about the presentation or anything that was shared?
Not so much a question, but gratitude. I grew up with a Hawaiian Japanese grandmother who I could feel her heart stopped when you said the words Pearl Harbor. She was just terrified to let her children and grandchildren feel Japanese because it was so scary for her. And I'm grateful that I don't have to carry that with me. And I'm also grateful that now I can have the agency to come to spaces like this and be welcomed home into my Japanese heritage by you, and to be told that story from such a compassionate and educated place. It was never told to me until today. So thank you, Michael.
Rose, thank you so much for sharing that. That's sweet. That's so sweet. You know, one of the things as folks are chiming in, I always like to finish my presentations with a call to action, and that is, you know, if you have time, I encourage all of you, right, to volunteer at a nonprofit. It can be in your local community, it can be anywhere you want, but volunteer. If you have money, please donate to a local nonprofit, and that's because they all need that support. If you don't have any money, if you don't have any time, it's okay, but you have to eat. So if you're going to eat, then I ask you to dine and shop in your community, because we have to help maintain it. And so please think of one of those options to just really support our communities, because without it, it won't survive. And I don't know about you, but I really, really love our community because it's really special. So yeah, cherish it, enjoy it. Thanks.
We got a question from Ron.
Yes.
Actually, it's not a question, I have a comment. I think well, actually a couple of comments. If you like Japanese food, there's some great Japanese sushi restaurants and other restaurants in Japantown, very convenient, very affordable. So definitely, that's one way to support.
Yes, absolutely.
We need to eat, right? And drink.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly. That's my whole thing, right? Is if you're going to eat in Japantown.
Exactly. And you know, it's like an authentic environment. So that's lots of food.
Yeah.
But on a more serious nature, you talk about World War II and the 442, and there's an American-made movie that not many people know about, and you can watch it online for free. It's in black and white, produced in America. It's called Go for Broke, and it depicts the entire history of the 442. And when the Japanese Americans enlisted in the army, there was the local boys in Hawaii, and when they say so in Hawaii, people like to gamble. So when they're gambling, well, Japanese, they like to gamble. So when they go all in, they put all their money in. They say, "Hey, let's go for broke, brother." Right? Put all your money in. So the name of the movie is called Go for Broke, and it talks about an American officer who is very skeptical about these Japanese American soldiers.
Mm.
And it also depicts the battle for the Lost Battalion.
Mm.
And it's literally a tearjerker to watch them fighting, and it's a movie. It's literally, it's black and white, very realistic. And I watched it several times, and I'm inspired to watch it again. I see Rose may have posted the link to the YouTube video. So I encourage
Thank you.
if you have young people that are not familiar, it's a very powerful way to really see and feel that story. So thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Ron, for that as well. There's another movie that I watched. It's a long one, but it's done pretty well. And it's actually was done by the Japanese through TBS Broadcasting in Japan, and that was Kyuju Kuna no Ai, or 99 Years of Love. And I watched this. It was a mini series they had over a week, and it was done in Japanese. There's a lot of famous movie stars in it, but it depicts I would say about 90% is accurate. There's some pieces that just doesn't make sense, but because they're all Japanese actors, they're speaking Japanese, and that wasn't the way it was back then. But they did a great job. And so if you have a chance, Kyuju Kuna no Ai, 99 Years of Love, is a great another program, again from a Japanese perspective. And Ron, yours is also another one that I encourage everybody. And if you're looking for books, Facing the Mountain is a great one. And that I started reading it, I couldn't put it down. So if you're looking for a great book, it follows 5 different incarcerees and their stories. So it's pretty sweet.
Thanks for sharing, Ron. And next hand raised was Kazui.
Yep. Thank you, Jeff. By the way, thank you for Michael. I mean, I appreciate that I was born in Japan and raised in Japan, and until I left for Canada as of like 26 years old, I never heard this history about the Japanese people who moved to America. However, while I was in Canada, I met Mr. Ono, Kiyoshi Ono, and when he was 5 years old, he was living in Vancouver, and then after the Pearl Harbor hit, and he was captured, and then, as you mentioned about in America, they said that okay, you can play the baseball. In case of like Canada, they said that you can do the kendo. So he was able to keep the stick with just one stick, and then every day do the kendo. So then after that, like as you said, they put the old Japanese to move to the East Coast. In case of the Mr. Ono went to the Quebec, which is I was living like for 10 years, which is like Montreal, and then I met him. And then my husband started doing a kendo, and then he had Mr. Ono had a Montreal Kendo Club. So now in Canada, because of him, I'm sorry, he spread the kendo, what kendo is, not only physical, but also spirit. So I was very honored to be there. And yeah, so anyway, so if you go to Canada, even US, there are a lot of people doing the kendo. So I'm very like happy I was born in Japanese and then be here to contribute my life here in the States. And thank you for meeting with you guys. I don't know, I don't know, I'm crying. But yes, it was very nice presentation, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, cousin. Floyd, you had your hand up next.
Yes, Michael, I live in Salt Lake City now, and Salt Lake City had a Japantown. It was very vibrant, and in the 60s, the city and the county decided to build a convention center and kind of basically eliminated Japantown, except for one block was left where there's a Japanese Christian church and the Buddhist temple. And so there's a big move now to revitalize what they did before. And we're trying to preserve what is left of Japantown. But your story today gave me a lot of inspiration to now lobby for a element within this revitalization, they're calling it, because they're bringing a hockey team in along with the Jazz, and they're going to build a entertainment sports complex area. But the county has a lot of the property there, and hopefully we can lobby. You've inspired me anyway to work to lobby to develop some kind of a small museum within that redevelopment and revitalization that shows that, this was a very vibrant area of 90 plus merchants and establishments, Japanese, where now that was totally wiped away with the building of the convention center that sits there now. I think politically there's a lot of support to preserve, but I think a museum would certainly, even if it's a small display in the museum of what Japantown was, would be very significant in that revitalization process. So thank you for that inspiration to me.
No, it's important, right? Because you've got to remember. Otherwise, yeah, it gets lost. So absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks,
Floyd. Thank you.
Thanks, Floyd. Carolyn, you had your hand up next.
Yes, I just want to say to Michael, that was excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I've been working with the, San Jose, San Jose State University Asian American Studies alumni. And in the 70s, when I went to state, I minored in Asian American Studies. And it's been 50 years. And this 2024 is the first BA for Asian American Studies that they can get an actual degree. And we have 3 people that are qualified.
Wow.
To graduate with that. So, it's a big step.
Accomplishment. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And, led by Yvonne Kwan, who,
Oh my God.
Yeah, led by Yvonne.
She's on our board. She's on our board.
She's on your board. She's on the board. Yeah, she's the director for Asian American Studies.
Yeah, yes,
so I work with Yvonne quite a bit, and she's just a go-getter.
Yes, she is.
Yeah. So I'm really happy and proud to be involved with all that, and to have met these young people that gave me hope back in 2023 when we first started this, and they just really gave me a lot of hope for the future, and really made it so that we wanted to work harder also for keeping it alive and building the alumni association so that we could help the students coming in. So anyway, there's that part, but I also want to speak with Kozue and your wonderful story about the Kendo, because that's kind of near and dear to my family. My grandpa on my mom's side, he was a Kendo master. And so when the Pearl Harbor hit and everybody got scared, he went to the mountains they live in Auburn, Washington, by Seattle. He went to the mountain and he buried all his Kendo stuff. He buried it all because he was so scared to be caught with that, because they would take him away.
Wow.
So he buried it all. So I just want to say, you know, I'm glad that the guy in Canada
He carried on. Yes.
carried on. Yeah,
Mhm.
because for my grandpa, you know, it's very, he had family. He had 6 children. So it's like, well, actually, he had 5. One was born in camp, so 6. Yeah.
Wow. So you have no idea, maybe like more than 10 candle crab in Canada.
Wow.
And then even US, like there are a lot of
Mhm.
crabs in the LA area too. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so they carried on. It's beautiful. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing. Lorraine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Floyd and Colbert, if you guys want to come on camera, I'd love to grab a screenshot of those of us that are here tonight. All right. I'll count us down from 3. Oh, let me quick out. Yeah. All right. If you guys want to look at the screen, and 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Yeah, there is. Every time I go to the museum, I avoid listening to when Michael gives the tour. Not because he's my dad, but because there's like a heaviness that comes with it. So even today, there's a heaviness in my heart around hearing the story again, and there's always new things I pick up from any presentation he gives around it. And there's something that I picked up this time where there's a balance we get to hold or find as Japanese Americans in terms of remembering the history and knowing what happened so it doesn't happen again, but also doing the healing work to let go of some of the generational trauma. And so something you said around not disturbing others and carrying that mentality to not have that negative impact on people around us. There's a fine line between the healthy version of that and the unhealthy version of that. And I think a lot of us still operate from the unhealthy version of that, where we're not able to do what we feel authentically, or we feel almost guilty or bad for choosing ourselves or filling our own cups. And so that's the balance in the work that we get to do, being aware of these things. And it's just a reminder every time I hear those stories. For those of you that are in San Jose, in August, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I will actually be partnering with the museum to hold a panel discussion around Japanese healing modalities. So I'm a Reiki practitioner. Carolyn and Michael don't know this yet, but I will be also asking them to join us for that, being trained in Reiki and healing practices. And following that, we'll be doing a sound ceremony in the space of the museum. So a combination of sound bowls and other instruments used to facilitate healing. And there's a lot of trauma and history stored in that space. I mean, there's a full recreation of the internment camp there. And as lighthearted as the space is with all the people that are volunteering their time there, that the energy holds, it also holds this very dark side. And so doing some of the healing in that place for the people that show up is something that I don't believe we've ever done before. And it's going to be pretty powerful. Those of you who know PJ with San Jose Taiko, we're in discussion around how she can be involved in this. She won't be there for the first event as she has other obligations, but it is something we're going to be looking at exploring, maybe having, you know, four throughout the year. So if you're in San Jose, I'm looking for that.
What is the date of that again?
We're still in the planning phase of this. We haven't set one, but I can definitely keep you updated, Floyd.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that's a great idea, Jeffrey. Vanessa mentioned that, that you guys were working on it, and it's brilliant, right? Because there is so much trauma that is captured in that space, and all the artifacts, right, carry that into the museum. So for you to go through that process, I think would be very enlightening, and I think it'd be good for everybody.
Very good.
There's so
Yeah.
much I don't even think we realize, right? Like in what you shared, I only had awareness this time hearing it, right? And I don't know how many other times it's been shared, but it's like, oh, that comes from a place of during the camps, right? We were taught to
Oh,
keep
yeah.
our head down. Don't
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
be
Oh yeah.
the nail that sticks out or you're going to get
Yeah.
smashed down,
Yeah.
right? So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it comes from
It's
a
that
place.
whole. Yeah, it's that whole mindset. I mean, and that's the reason why a lot of the Niseis and then now the Sanseis don't speak Japanese, right? Because they were afraid that their children would pick up that be stereotyped, and they would have the accent, and so they told their kids just only speak English, which is sad, right? Because they lost that one generation of language.
But really cool
Yeah.
because as the granddaughter of someone who made that decision for her family, I hold two places in my heart for it. On the one hand, she didn't really lose it on our behalf, because the first time I ever heard Jeff say the Gokai in Japanese, my soul reawakened in a way that I could not have anticipated. And I will never stop honoring my grandmother for doing what she had to do to protect her children, because that's part of why I'm here.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
context,
Absolutely.
the Gokai is the 5 principles of Reiki. that are-
Reiki. Yeah.
I'm Michael. I'm going to have to run, but nice job. I really appreciated it and look forward to visiting the museum next time I'm in San Jose.
Yes, yes, please do, Colbert. I'd love to see you at the museum.
Yeah. So
Thanks.
But if I might just mention one thing, and the reason why the AGAs in Hawaii weren't incarcerated was they didn't own any land. The plantations were, they worked on the plantations, and so there were very different economic interests at stake.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, but hey, Floyd, good to see you still staying real active. So
Hang in there. You know,
All
I
right.
I might mention one trauma thing is I'm Floyd Mori, but my real name is Shiro. I was Shiro Mori, and I didn't have an American name. I started school in 1945, and that's when my family decided I needed an American name and not a Japanese name. And so I'm S. Floyd, S standing for Shiro, fourth son. And I think there are a lot of folks that went through that process. On my birth certificate, it doesn't say Floyd at all. It just says Shiro.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Neil, thanks for joining us tonight.
Sorry, I just missed it for half 20 minutes. Sorry about that. I had another meeting. Sorry.
No, but yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all for joining and being part of this tonight. We have another one in July 11th, and the next time Rose will be presenting her experience of discovering being Japanese 30 years into life. Also, those of you that would like to share or present something, we're doing these once a month in the evenings, about the second or third Thursday of every month. So if there is something you would like to talk about or share your story or anything relevant to the Japanese American experience, please reach out to me and we'll get you on the calendar. And then continue to, show up for these and just interact and engage with one another. It sounded like I'll make a connection for Carolyn and Cozy to be in touch with one another. Floyd, it sounds like you're already connected, but if not already, maybe having conversations with Michael around how to get a museum set up out in Salt Lake.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then Jeffrey, Miho's on the East Coast, so
Okay. Oh, it's like 10.
yeah,
11.
late. So
11.
Thank you for joining. Yeah.
yeah, thank you for joining.
Wow.
Thank you.
East Coast.
Yeah. Rose is also on the East Coast, so she was up
That's right. I'm sorry, Rose.
from Matcha.
No, it's okay. I'm on Central Time now. I gained an hour when I moved to Nashville.
But yeah, so July 11th will be our next presentation by Rose. In August 15th, we have a presentation by Aki Ohashi. And then on September 19th, Keijiro Hora will be presenting about JCCNC. So
The Chamber of Commerce. Yeah. Nice.
So thank you all for joining, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Take care, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.